Can you believe the very foundation of existence, the bedrock of reality itself, was forged in an act of unimaginable, brutal betrayal? This is not just history. This is the seismic event that tore the cosmos apart, setting the stage for every myth, every legend, every catastrophic war that followed. Welcome to the full, unexpurgated story of the Titans, a dynasty built on blood and paranoia. We are plunging head first into the abyss, back to the absolute 0 point of time, where only the primordial entities stirred. Before gods, before mortals, there was only the suffocating, infinite terror of the void known as chaos. But from this chaotic, senseless swirl, two titans of creation emerged: Gaia, the boundless earth, and Uranus, the infinite, star-studded sky. Imagine a world where the parents are literally the entire planet and the entire atmosphere, constantly intertwined in a suffocating embrace. Their union wasn't a romance. It was a merger of cosmic forces, a relentless, crushing pressure that birthed monstrosities that defied all logic and sanity. Gaia was fertile, impossibly so, and the first children she delivered were not the benevolent gods we know, but something far more ancient, far more terrifying. They were the 12 colossal titans: Oceanus, Coeus, Crius, Hyperion, Iapetus, and the youngest, the most dangerous of them all, Cronus, and their sisters, Tethys, Phoebe, Thea, Rhea, Themis, and Mnemosyne. These beings were power incarnate, their shadows stretching across nascent reality. But the horror didn't stop there. Gaia kept pushing, kept stretching the bounds of creation. And what came next made the colossal titans look like mere toddlers. She birthed the Cyclopes, 3 beings of pure, molten fury, each possessing a single, terrifying eye that could burn worlds. Master smiths whose thunderous hammers would later forge the very weapons of Olympus. And finally, the creatures that truly broke the mind of their father, the Hecatoncheires. 100 arms, 50 heads, beings of such grotesque, overwhelming power that their very presence was a gravitational anomaly, a catastrophe no one saw coming, certainly not Uranus, who was meant to be the unchallenged, glorious ruler of the cosmos. Uranus, the glorious sky, looked down upon his progeny, and his heart was not filled with paternal pride, but with a paralyzing, jealous fear. He was the original Alpha, the first king, and he saw in the sheer, unbridled power of these children especially the 100-armed giants, a threat to his eternal, unchallenged dominion. He didn't just banish them. He pressed the entire weight of his celestial body down upon Gaia, trapping his children within her, forcing the boundless earth to bear the agonizing pain of imprisonment. This wasn't merely a political maneuver. This was cosmic abuse on an unthinkable scale. The sky held the earth hostage, and the earth screamed in silent, geological agony. Imagine the relentless, burning fury of Gaia. Her body was racked with pain, her essence tormented by the imprisoned souls of her most powerful children. She was the earth, and she was being crushed by her own husband. This pain morphed into a single, blazing core of revenge, and she knew she needed an instrument, a blade, to set her free. She called forth her remaining children, the 12 great titans, the ones who still roamed free beneath the sky's suffocating weight. She pleaded, she wept, she demanded action. But the titans, despite their massive power, were afraid. Who dares challenge the infinite sky? Who dares lift a hand against the unchallenged Creator? One by one, they averted their gaze, shrinking from the terrifying task. The sky was too vast, his power too absolute. They wanted dominion, yes, but not at the cost of utter annihilation. But then, the youngest stepped forward, the one whose ambition burned hotter and darker than all his siblings combined. Cronus, the titan of time, the scheming, calculating usurper. He listened to the agonizing cries of his mother, felt the oppressive weight of his father's tyranny, and smiled. He was willing to do what no one else dared. He saw not a father, but a throne ripe for the taking. Gaia, ecstatic and desperate, plunged into the deepest parts of her own essence, mining the indestructible material of the earth itself. She forged a weapon unlike any ever seen, a massive, razor-sharp sickle, curved like a crescent moon, made of the hardest flint, a cosmic scythe designed for one purpose only: regicide. This was the moment the universe tilted. This was the covenant of blood. Cronus took the weapon, hid it deep beneath his cloak, and waited for the terrifying, inevitable moment when Uranus, exhausted by his own tyranny, would descend once more to embrace Gaia in the suffocating darkness of night. The air thickened with suspense. The silence was broken only by the subterranean screams of the Cyclopes struggling in Tartarus. Cronus knew the stakes. If he failed, the punishment would be eternal, absolute oblivion. But if he succeeded, he would become the undisputed master of creation. This single, violent act, performed in the deepest hours of the first night, would set the precedent for succession, betrayal, and war that would define the entire course of mythology. It's the story of how the Titans took control and why they were destined to lose it all. Get ready, because the heavens are about to bleed. But before the storm could truly break, there was the silence of absolute terror. Uranus, the sky, the ultimate dictator of the nascent cosmos, looked down upon his earliest progeny and saw not family, but existential threats to his unchallenged rule. He was so utterly paranoid, so consumed by the fear of succession, that he devised a truly monstrous, utterly suffocating solution to eternal kingship. He saw the sheer, raw, volcanic power simmering inside his first children, the terrifying, one-eyed architects known as the Cyclopes, Kyklopes, masters of thunder, lightning, and hurricane-force winds, and the colossal, horrifying creatures with 50 heads and 100 devastating hands, the Hecatonchires. These beings were living forces of nature, power incarnate, and Uranus knew that if they were allowed to stand, his reign was already forfeit. He couldn't kill them, for they were immortal, woven into the fabric of creation itself. But he could erase them from the light. In a fit of jealous rage and profound insecurity, he violently shoved them down into the deepest, darkest, most suffocating pit imaginable, the very core and womb of their mother, Gaia. Imagine the cosmic horror, the earth herself, feeling the crushing, unbearable weight of her imprisoned, immortal children, tearing and clawing at her very core, screaming silently into the void. These were not just physical entities, they were primal forces, and their anguish resonated through the entire planetary body. Gaia writhed in agony, unlike anything creation had ever witnessed. This wasn't just discomfort. This was the spiritual and physical torture of creation corrupted, the unbearable pressure of 1,000 imprisoned futures pushing outward from the center of the world. Every tectonic plate shift, every volcanic eruption that shook the fragile surface of the young world was merely
Gaia's suppressed, earth-shattering scream for vengeance against the husband who had violently turned her body, her own sanctuary, into the universe's first, most brutal jail cell.
The pain became an intolerable demand for action. Gaia knew that if she didn't strike back, the oppressive, jealous sky would forever smother the nascent world, ensuring that nothing new, nothing free could ever grow. Utilizing her immense, subterranean power, she pulled herself together, channeling her raw, terrestrial energy to communicate secretly with her younger, still free children, the mighty titans who had not yet been subjected to their father's cruel paranoia. Under the vast, indifferent shadow of their tyrant father, Uranus, Gaia poured out her heart, or rather, her molten, suffering core. She presented them with a choice that was no choice at all. Live forever in fear as second-class deities, constantly awaiting imprisonment, or rise up in a desperate, impossible act of defiance and claim the dominion that was rightfully theirs, freeing their tormented siblings in the process. The very air in the hidden, deep earth cavern was thick with fear and paralyzing uncertainty. The mighty titans, Oceanus, Tethys, Hyperion, Theia, Cous, Phoebe, and the rest, all hesitated, their immortal hearts gripped by terror. Uranus was not just powerful. He was the sky itself, vast, eternal, and inescapable. Treason against him meant an unprecedented act of cosmic patricide, guaranteeing the absolute destruction of their very essence should they fail. But then, stepping forward from the oppressive shadows, came the youngest, the most cunning, and arguably the most ruthlessly ambitious of them all, Cronus, the Titan of time and harvest. He was silent for a long, calculating moment, his cold gaze fixed on the invisible heavens above, weighing the astronomical risk against the ultimate reward. This was the face of absolute betrayal, illuminated by the subterranean glow of Gaia's tears. He spoke, his voice ringing with a chilling, revolutionary finality that defied the heavens. "Mother, I will do it. I will undertake this terrible, necessary task, for I despise the endless shame and the systematic cruelty he has inflicted upon us all, burying our own in the deepest darkness." Gaia wept tears of relief, and subterranean dust,
knowing she had finally found her champion, her terrible instrument of change. Now they needed the tool, not just any weapon, but one capable of wounding the primal, unyielding force of the cosmos itself. Gaia delved deep into her own being, mining the raw, unyielding, hyper-dense substance of the Earth's deepest core. She pulled forth a massive vein of shimmering, terrible material, the unbreakable, diamond-hard metal known throughout eternity as adamant. It glowed with the cold, sterile light of creation's forge, harder than any star. With her own hands, the Earth Mother shaped this terrifying material, grinding it, heating it with volcanic fire, hardening it in the cold vacuum of the abyss until it became a single, gigantic, crescent-shaped blade. This scythe was perfectly formed for one single, devastating purpose: the severing of fate. This was no mere farming tool, despite Cronus's domain over the harvest. This was the weapon of destiny, the cosmic blade that would brutally cut the umbilical cord of the universe and establish a new, terrifying order built on patricide. Cronus took the immense weapon, feeling the hungry, humming power thrumming within the adamant. The plan was meticulous, utilizing the very predictable routine of their oppressor, the one weakness of the infinite sky. They knew that Uranus, in his arrogance and passion, would descend at night, covering the earth entirely in his starry, possessive embrace, seeking to couple with Gaia and assert his dominance, momentarily forgetting the world beneath him. This was the single moment of maximum vulnerability, the point where the infinite sky lay closest to the vulnerable earth. The other Titans, their profound fear momentarily overwhelmed by the intoxicating, dangerous promise of freedom, were given crucial, silent roles. They had to be motionless sentinels, holding the vast, starry expanse of the sky in place, pinning him down and distracting him, just long enough for Cronus to execute the unspeakable, unforgettable deed and unleash the Age of Titans upon the stunned universe. The universe didn't just gasp. It screamed a silent, echoing terror as the primordial blood of the Sky King, Uranus, erupted from his severed body. This wasn't mere mortal liquid. This was ichor, the raw, undiluted essence of creation. And as it poured across the face of Gaia, the earth, it began to ferment, to change reality itself.
The very foundation of existence shuddered under the cataclysmic, visceral shockwave of the first true regicide. Gaia, who had conceived the plot, watched the horrific spectacle unfold, a macabre mixture of satisfaction and burgeoning dread flooding her ancient soul. From the foam and the steaming earth where Uranus's divine substance met the dust, unspeakable horrors clawed their way into being. These were not the gentle, balanced children of the earlier age. These were the offspring of pure, bloody vengeance and violation. The first to rise were the Erinyai, the Furies, dark goddesses of relentless retribution, their hair a writhing mass of vipers, their purpose singular and terrifying, to hound any living creature who spilled the blood of kin. They were the moral police of the cosmos, born from the ultimate crime, and they would never know rest. Following them were the towering gigantes, the giants, colossal beings destined to become the next great threat to the celestial order, massive engines of war crafted from the soil and the divine ichor. And finally, the gentle but haunting Milaya, the ash tree nymphs, emerged, binding the moment of ultimate destruction to the fleeting beauty of nature. The entire universe was now stained by the patricide. Cronus, the audacious youngest son, stood supreme. The adamantine sickle, the ultimate tool of treachery, still heavy in his hand, glistening under a newly liberated sky that now belonged to him alone. The remaining Titans, momentarily stunned by the audacious speed and brutality of the coup, immediately coalesced around the victor. The old cosmic hierarchy was incinerated. The age of Titans had dawned, bathed in the blood of its predecessor. Cronus immediately began to solidify his power, not through wisdom or empathy, but through sheer, terrifying authority. He declared an immediate cessation of the tyranny of the past, ushering in the fabled Golden Age, a time that would later be romanticized as a period of effortless peace, where mankind needed no laws and the earth produced bounty without toil. But let me tell you the truth. The legends often skip. The Golden Age was a lie, built on a foundation of bone-chilling hypocrisy and inherited paranoia. Cronus
had used the promise of freedom to rally his siblings, but he had learned one lesson too well from his father, Uranus. Absolute power must be absolutely guarded. And his first act as the new sovereign proved that the cycle of oppression was not broken, merely repurposed. He immediately turned his attention to the true powers still rattling the gates of the underworld. The monstrous siblings who had helped Gaia forge the weapon, the very ones he had promised freedom. The single-eyed Cyclopus and the 100-handed Hecatonchires. Cronus looked at their raw, untamed might, at the sheer, terrifying power of their 100 arms and their single, searing eyes, and saw not loyal brothers, but terrifying rivals. He saw instruments of war too powerful to be left outside his immediate control. The liberating hero's moment of glory evaporated as he commanded the guards, the primordial wardens of the pit, to reinforce the chains. He threw the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires back into the deepest, most suffocating depths of Tartarus, confirming that his reign would be just as jealous, just as fearful, and infinitely more treacherous than his father's had ever been. The universe recoiled again at this swift, brutal betrayal. Gaia, who had risked everything, felt the icy sting of disappointment, realizing she had traded one tyrant for another, one paranoia for a bloodier version. The seeds of the next great conflict were sown in that instant of hypocrisy. With the greatest threats locked away, Cronus installed his immediate family as the ruling council. His siblings, the 10 other Titans, became the foundational pillars of the new cosmology. Coeus and Phoebe ruling intellect and prophecy, Hyperion and Theia commanding the light, Crius and Iapetus overseeing the cardinal directions and mortality, and Tethys and Oceanus controlling the vast, watery domain. But the center of power was the royal couple, Cronus and his sister, Rhea, the Titaness of motherhood and fertility. Rhea, known for her gentle beauty and grace, was forced into the marriage of convenience, destined to bear the children who would eventually become the Olympian gods. As Cronus settled onto his throne, feeling the crushing weight of the cosmos upon his shoulders, a chilling, final sound echoed through the newly defined cosmos. It was the receding, spectral voice of Uranus, delivering his final, searing judgment, a curse of unparalleled power. You rejoiced in the betrayal, my son. You took the sickle to my very essence. But know this, Cronus, you who bear the title of king, the wheel of fate turns for all usurpers. Just as you overthrew me in blood and iron, so too shall the children you beget rise up in fury and cast you down into the eternal, suffocating darkness. The prophecy, whispered on the vanishing breath of the sky, was the poison that immediately began to corrupt the so-called Golden Age. Cronus, the ultimate victor, suddenly understood the profound horror of his victory. He had not seized power. He had merely inherited the curse of paranoia, and he knew, deep in his treacherous heart, that his own actions had provided the exact blueprint for his inevitable, catastrophic downfall. The terrifying reality was this. The king had already signed his own death warrant the moment he lifted the sickle, and the universe held its breath, waiting for the first tiny, vulnerable life form to emerge from the womb of Rhea, destined to be either the savior or the final executioner of the Age of Titans. Cronus was supposed to be the liberator, the Titan who broke the chains of the primordial father, Uranus. But history, my friends, is a vicious cycle, and absolute power is the most corrosive poison in the cosmos, turning saviors into the very monsters they swore to destroy. The universe didn't get a golden age of freedom. It got a golden age of absolute, terrifying silence under a sovereign whose fear was more vast than the celestial expanse itself. Cronus, the youngest son, who wielded the adamantine sickle, now sat on the ultimate celestial throne, ruling alongside his great sister wife, Rhea, the mother of destiny. He had everything: power, loyalty from his Titan brothers, and the undivided dominion over time itself. Yet every shadow he saw reminded him of that moment, the brutal, bloody ambush of his own father. That memory was not a victory celebration. It was a devastating blueprint for his own downfall. Cronus inherited the crown, yes, but he also inherited the crippling paranoia that had consumed Uranus before him, magnified tenfold by the weight of his own betrayal. He knew, better than anyone, what a son was capable of doing to a father who stood in the way of destiny. And the prophecy, whispered by the dying, mutilated remnants of Uranus, echoed through the starry void, an eternal curse upon the line of succession. A son of yours will overthrow you, just as you overthrew me. This was not just a threat. It was the cosmic law of continuity,
sealed by the blood spilled during the first great coup. Cronus couldn't just dismiss it. He lived the proof of it. Rhea, the beautiful and fertile Titaness, brought forth the first child in this new, fearful dynasty. This was Hestia, the bright, innocent essence of the hearth and home, the very symbol of nascent civilization and stability, a gentle light born into the fearful darkness. Cronus looked upon his daughter and saw not familial love, but the sharp, unforgiving glint of the sickle reflected in her newborn eyes, a future weapon aimed straight at his throat. The terror struck him in a flash of blinding, insane realization. If he allowed them to grow, they would learn his history. They would inherit his ambition. They would inevitably forge their own weapons of rebellion. He had to stop the future before it even began, using the only method he truly understood: complete and total consumption, eliminating the threat before it took its first true breath. Then came the third, Hera, the furious and beautiful queen-to-be, the future partner to the supreme ruler, a titaness destined to rule the heavens alongside the coming savior. Her fate was identical: swallowed, vanished. The cosmic nursery was rapidly becoming a cosmic graveyard, and Rhea was forced to endure this unbearable, repeated violation, her body birthing life only to watch Cronus brutally extinguish it. The Titan King was operating on a perverse logic of perfect, preventative destruction. If they were trapped inside him, they could never challenge him. They were contained within his own temporal prison, held hostage by the infinite, slow grinding mechanism of his digestive system. This wasn't merely food. It was his ultimate, cruel insurance policy against destiny itself. Rhea's sorrow had curdled into a cold, desperate rage. She was the mother of life, yet her purpose had been reduced to providing living sustenance for her paranoid husband's internal prison cell, her motherhood becoming a tool of oppression. Every subsequent birth was a torture, a terrifying countdown to the next horrific consumption, stripping her of hope. And then came the fifth, Poseidon, the mighty shaper of the waters, the future tremor of the earth, a force of chaos and boundless energy destined to command the shifting seas. Cronus, now bloated and heavy with his 5 imprisoned children, swallowed him too, cementing his position as the most feared and absolute parent the cosmos had ever known. 5 siblings, the first generation of true gods, were now living, or rather existing, in a state of absolute, eternal darkness within the belly of their father, the embodiment of cruel time and absolute monarchy. They were alive, immortal, yet utterly incapable of action or defiance, suspended in the nightmarish dimension of the Titan King's gut, waiting for a savior who might never arrive. Rhea knew this horrific cycle could not continue. Her body was preparing for the sixth and potentially final birth. This time, there would be no sacrifice. There would be no submission. If her destiny was to birth the ultimate downfall of Cronus, she would ensure that this last, fragile life form survived the monster's unrelenting hunger. She sought counsel not from her Titan sisters, who were too cowed by Cronus's power to intervene, but from the ancient, deep, primordial forces. She went to Gaia, the earth itself, her mother, the original architect of betrayal and the mistress of deception, seeking the wisdom of the ancients. And Gaia, the grandmother of the coming gods, understood the assignment perfectly and nodded with grim resolve. The plan was audacious, heartbreaking, and the only path left to cheat fate. Rhea would hide the child. But how do you hide a celestial being from the very God of time, who sees all futures and consumes all moments of being? You cannot hide the child, but you can certainly offer a convincing, deadly substitute. As Rhea prepared for the birth that would either save the universe or doom her to the same fate as her eternally imprisoned children, the stage was set for the greatest cosmic substitution in history. The fate of the Age of Titans now rested entirely on a single act of maternal dissection, a single perfect lie told to the universe's most suspicious, most powerful, and most consumed being. The sixth child was coming, and his name would soon shake the foundations of existence, promising a war that would redefine reality. The air itself was thick with the silent, suffocating scream of creation. Uranus, the sky, had become a tyrant, consumed not by malice, but by the paralyzing, self-fulfilling prophecy he could not escape. Every time Gaia, the earth, gave birth, the sight of the child, even the smallest, gentlest Titan, sent a fresh jolt of acid through his divine fear. This fear metastasized into absolute, crushing tyranny. But it was the monstrous children, the raw, chaotic power embodied by the Cyclopes, the mighty, single-eyed Smiths, and the Hecatoncheires, the hundred-handed ones, that truly broke Uranus's composure and pushed the world toward war.
He couldn't kill them. They were too fundamental, too much a part of the original essence, but he could not bear to look upon them, seeing only future usurpers. So he did the only thing a coward with infinite power can do. He hid them. He forced them deep beneath the bedrock of the world, down into the crushing, lightless void of Tartarus. This was not just a dungeon. It was the deepest pit of cosmic reality, the first and most terrible prison ever conceived. The pain of their imprisonment was not just theirs. It was Gaia's pain, amplified 1,000-fold. She felt every shackle, every agonizing breath they took, for Tartarus was located deep within her own divine body. The Earth Mother was literally cracking, her surface convulsing, not in seismic activity, but in divine maternal anguish. She was the foundation, the steady ground. Yet her heart was being ripped out by her own spouse, the very sky who was meant to protect her. She needed a deliverer, a champion willing to commit the ultimate patricide, a crime unheard of in the nascent cosmos, a violation that would forever stain the fabric of time. She called her 12 majestic Titan children, the Ura generation, to her hidden, cavernous sanctuary. Fear radiated off them like heat haze. Their father's shadow was long and absolute, covering every potential thought of rebellion. The question was whispered in the deepest silence. Who among them possessed the steel, the cold ambition, to challenge the infinite sky itself? Oceanus, the eldest, shook his head, unwilling to disrupt the endless, peaceful flow of the primal sea that was his domain. Tethys and Rhea clung to their neutrality, terrified of the consequences. The great majority of the elder Titans hesitated, paralyzed by the sheer, overwhelming, blinding might of Uranus. But then, through the dim, smoky light of the cavern, a figure stepped forward, his shadow unnaturally long. Not the strongest, perhaps, but certainly the most cunning, the most ruthlessly ambitious. It was Cronus, the youngest of the first generation. His eyes, usually reflecting the cool calculation of time, now burned with a chilling, predatory fire. He did not step forward out of filial piety or love for his tormented siblings, though he claimed these noble motives. He stepped forward because he saw the opportunity. He saw the gaping vulnerability in his father's paranoia, and most importantly, he saw the ultimate, vacant throne. "Mother," his voice echoed, smooth as polished obsidian, carrying the weight of an era yet to begin. "I will do what none of my brothers dare. I will free my siblings. I will stop the tyranny. But the sky must fall completely. Absolute power requires an absolute severance." This was not loyalty. This was the ultimate power play, the first calculated act of high treason in all of existence. Gaia wept, tears of relief and deep sorrow falling onto the elemental rock. She knew the price of this violence, this ultimate sundering, but the alternative was eternal suppression and the death of hope. She reached deep into her own being, into the very core material of the earth that had yet to solidify into permanent, stable land masses. She extracted a substance unlike anything seen before, a dense, unyielding, razor-sharp material known only as adamantine, harder than any star metal, capable of slicing through the very fabric of the cosmos. With her agonizing, primal strength, she forged it. Not a spear of war, nor a sword of conquest, but a weapon of harvest and ultimate severance, a massive hooked sickle, a cosmic scythe. This was the scythe of heaven, the instrument designed not just to wound, but to eternally sever the link between the sky and the earth. It was terrifyingly beautiful, reflecting the cold, hard ambition of Cronus back at him. "Take it, my son," Gaia commanded, her voice raw with impending grief. "Take the burden of this unforgivable deed, and remember why you lifted this blade, for freedom or for only the crown." The plan was simplicity itself, disguised by audacious, suicidal risk. Uranus descended nightly to cover Gaia, his loving embrace now a claustrophobic, suffocating shroud of darkness. That moment of union, that cosmic intimacy, was their only window of opportunity before he retreated again to the distant stars. 4 of the stronger male titans: Coeus, the mind of intellect; Crius, the master of dominion; Hyperion, the father of light; and Iapetus, the god of mortality, were assigned positions at the 4 cardinal corners of the universe. Their task was horrifyingly specific: hold their father's immense, star-studded bulk steady just long enough for the strike. This coordination was fraught with existential tension. A single misstep,
a flicker of hesitation, and Uranus, with his infinite sight and power, would instantaneously incinerate them all into cosmic dust, erasing their very memory from time. They waited, silent, beneath the shadow of the sky, the air thick with anticipation and the metallic scent of the newly forged adamantine. Cronus clutched the sickle, its cold weight grounding him to the earth he was fighting for and the power he craved. He was no longer just the youngest son. He was the executioner, the instrument of cosmic revolution, ready to usher in the bloody age of Titans through an act of unparalleled, definitive violence. The stage was set for the original, world-shattering Greek tragedy. The universe held its breath, a vast, echoing chamber of anticipation as the plotting concluded. Gaia, the ancient Earth Mother, felt the burden of her children's suffering lift slightly, replaced by the cold, steel resolve of necessity. She had mapped the stars of fate, and the trajectory required the destruction of the Sky King. Cronus, the youngest and most ruthless of the first generation of Titans, gripped the jagged, curved blade of the adamantine sickle, feeling its unnatural sharpness hum against his palm, a perfect instrument for patricide, forged from the very essence of the Earth's bitter rage. The plan was simple, insidious, and utterly effective. When Uranus, in his overwhelming arrogance and desire for control, descended from the celestial heights to merge with Gaia, seeking his nightly, smothering embrace, the ambush would spring. It was a vulnerability he never imagined being exploited, the ultimate intimacy becoming the ultimate trap. As the celestial dome lowered, blanketing the world in a shadow that was usually comforting, but now felt terrifyingly heavy, Uranus stretched himself across the vast expanse of his consort. He was oblivious, drunk on the narcotic of his own undisputed, eternal power, never seeing the cosmic conspiracy unfolding beneath his stellar cloak. The moment was ripe, saturated with suspense. Coeus, Crius, Hyperion, and Iapetus, the four Titan brothers, were positioned at the cardinal points of the compass, holding down the immense, starry bulk of their father's limbs, pinning the very firmament to the ground. Uranus, startled by the sudden, unprecedented resistance, let out a sound that was not merely a shout, but a fracturing of reality itself, a scream that echoed through the empty voids between nascent galaxies. But it was too late. He was snared, the boundless sky trapped by the very earth he sought to dominate. Then came the moment of absolute, definitive, cosmic violence. Cronus, driven by years of buried resentment and the feverish promise of ultimate rulership, surged forward. The adamantine sickle flashed once, tearing through the ethereal flesh of the sky god with a sickening, grinding sound that marked the end of an era and the beginning of all sorrow. It was the original sin, the act of primal, world-shattering betrayal that ripped the fabric of existence. Uranus, crippled and robbed of his generative power, convulsed. His vast body recoiled, tearing away from Gaia in a final, agonizing spasm, forever separating sky from earth. The sheer magnitude of the violence released energies that instantaneously formed new, terrifying species of being. The divine blood, the ichor that erupted from the wound, rained down upon Gaia, scorching the earth where it fell. From these drops, seeping into the soil of the ancient world, sprung forth the Erinyes, the Furies. These were not deities of beauty or light, but grotesque, winged nightmares, embodying eternal vengeance, their hair writhing with poisonous serpents. They were the living, terrifying curse of patricide, born to hunt down and punish any who dared to raise a hand against their own kin, ensuring that Cronus's triumph would forever be haunted by the shadow of his crime. Simultaneously, the ichor birthed the gigantes, giants, enormous, powerful beings destined to challenge future celestial orders, and the Meliae, ash tree nymphs, the nymphs of strength and hardness, symbolizing the harsh new rule. But the severed, vital parts of the sky god were cast far beyond the horizon, hurled into the vast, churning abyss of the sea. They drifted upon the waves, mixing with the primordial ocean foam, and from this grotesque, violent mingling of divine flesh and salty water, something utterly unexpected and breathtakingly beautiful was born. This was Aphrodite, the goddess of love, beauty, and desire, emerging fully formed from the sea foam near the island of Cyprus. The greatest violence in history had inadvertently created the greatest embodiment of attraction, a testament to the chaotic, unpredictable nature of existence itself. Uranus, mutilated and defeated, retreated into the cold, distant edges of the cosmos, forever banished from the center of creation. But before his retreat became absolute, his voice boomed across the newborn world, a final, chilling malediction against his treacherous son. He cursed Cronus, proclaiming that just as Cronus had unjustly overthrown his father, so too would his own children rise up to destroy him. It was a prophecy, a venomous legacy of paranoia and fear that immediately began to infect the psyche of the newly crowned king of the universe. The Age of Titans had begun, founded on a throne built of blood and betrayal. Cronus stood triumphant, the sickle still dripping, the weight of absolute power settling upon his shoulders. He was the supreme ruler, the lord of the golden age, yet he was immediately tainted by the fear that defined his predecessor. The first action of the new king was not one of liberation, but of reinforcing tyranny. He descended straight into Tartarus, but not to free his Cyclops and Hecatonshire's kin who had suffered under Uranus. Oh no, he went to ensure they remained locked away in the deepest prison, because their immense power was a threat to his new regime. The chains of the Cyclops rattled back into place. The prison gates slammed shut once more, and the Hecatonchirae groaned in renewed despair. Cronus had inherited the throne, but he had also inherited the paranoia, the cruelty, and the fundamental fear of being supplanted, ensuring that the Age of Titans would be powerful, glorious, but profoundly insecure, marching inexorably toward its own guaranteed bloody collapse. The blood of the sky god Uranus still dripped across the fields of the world, soaking into the earth like a dark, binding contract, when Cronus, the audacious youngest son, finally mounted the throne. He stood upon the ruins of the first tyranny, the ultimate revolutionary, bathed in the spectral dread of his father's final curse, and the cosmos waited, leaning in to witness the dawn of true freedom. But power, when seized through such catastrophic betrayal, rarely breeds liberation. It breeds the most exquisite, amplified paranoia. Cronus did not release the monstrous allies who had made his victory possible, the Cyclopses and the Hecatonchires, those giants who possessed the power of creation and destruction, who had been imprisoned by Uranus himself. He feared them. He knew their strength, and he knew their loyalty was to freedom, not necessarily to him. Cronus, the liberator, became the jailer of the very beings who had forged the weapon of his ascension, condemning them to the blackest depths of Tartarus, ensuring that the tyrannical cycle would not only continue, but would deepen into a profound existential terror. The Age of Titans had begun, a golden age in name only, built on a foundation of blood, stolen sovereignty, and the relentless, gnawing fear of mirroring the crime that brought him to power. Cronus solidified his rule by taking his majestic sister, Rhea, as his consort, placing her beside him as the queen of heaven and earth, the mother of the coming divine generations. The other Titans settled into their domains. Oceanus commanded the boundless seas. Tethys controlled the fertile rivers. Hyperion became the undisputed master of the sun's blinding light, and Theia gifted the gleam to the stars. It was a court of unparalleled magnificence, of raw, unbridled cosmic force, but beneath the golden veneer, the cracks of fatal insecurity were already widening. Gaia, the ancient earth, still wounded by the violence of the succession, rose up from the dust and spoke the first terrible prophecy to her victorious son. The words were delivered like a chilling wind through the newly built palace, echoing the final, choked scream of Uranus. Just as Cronus had overthrown his father, so too was he destined to be overthrown by one of his own children. This was not merely a warning. It was destiny asserting its mathematical precision. The fate of the universe was a closed loop, a cosmic serpent eating its own tail, and Cronus was trapped within its jaws. This prophecy did not spur him toward virtue or humility. It drove him straight into the pit of absolute, consuming madness. He had fought to end the reign of a tyrant who feared his own demise, and in that act, Cronus became the mirror image of everything he despised, an oppressor whose power was defined solely by the terror of his successors. Rhea, the beautiful, sorrowful queen, began to bear the new generation of gods, children of incredible power, destined to rule the cosmos. The deed was done. The age of gold instantly turned to an age of abomination. Cronus had secured his throne not through wisdom or justice, but by transforming himself into a walking, living tomb for the divine future. The terrifying act was repeated with ruthless, mechanical certainty. Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, was born next, only to be instantly consumed. Then came Hera, the formidable queen-to-be, ripped from her mother's arms and vanished into the darkness of Cronus's gut. Hades, the future lord of the underworld, and Poseidon, the mighty shaker of the earth, followed them into the digestive abyss, trapped in the suffocating blackness of their father's immense, eternal digestive tract. Rhea watched, powerless and broken, as her lineage, the very promise of the Titan dynasty, was systematically erased by the brutal paranoia of her husband. She was forced to serve the tyrant who had swallowed 5 of her children. 5 majestic gods held prisoner in the cosmic darkness of their father's stomach, awaiting a liberation that seemed utterly impossible. Her despair curdled into a cold, desperate resolve. The fate of the universe now rested not on the power of the Titans, but on the silent, secret plotting of one heartbroken mother, determined to defy the prophecy, not by succumbing to it, but by outsmarting the monster on the throne, setting the stage for the final, cataclysmic war for the control of existence itself. The universe held its breath, a vast, terrified witness to the silent plea of the primordial mother. Gaia, the embodiment of the crushed earth, gathered her children in the deepest, most shadowed recess of her being, far from the suffocating watch of Uranus. Her voice, usually a rolling thunder of creation, was a low, desperate vibration, laced with the pain of her imprisoned sons, the mighty Cyclopus and the 100-handed Hecatoncheires, locked away in the eternal darkness of Tartarus. She displayed the invisible chains that bound their monstrous brothers, showing the Titans that their freedom was an illusion, their power merely leashed potential, waiting for Uranus to crush them next. "Who among you," she demanded, her plea rattling the foundations of existence, "will take up the burden of liberation? Who will strike down the terrifying majesty of the sky and end this endless, crushing tyranny?" The great Titans, magnificent and powerful as they were, Oceanus, the river that rings the world, Tethys, the nurturing sea, Themis, the Titan of divine law, all trembled. To challenge Uranus, the primal force that defined reality, was not just rebellion, it was suicide. They looked away, their massive forms shrinking from the impossible task. But then, the fear-fueled silence was shattered by one voice, cold, calculating, and absolutely devoid of empathy. It was Cronus, the youngest, the most ruthless, the Titan of time and the cruelest imaginable ambition. He saw not the danger, but the opportunity, the ultimate prize resting on the head of his father. While his siblings saw the risk of obliteration, Cronus saw the empty throne. "Mother," he declared, stepping into the meager light, his form already possessing the chilling gravitas of a destined king, "I will do it. I will sever his reign. But know this, the power I seize, I claim for myself." Gaia looked upon her champion, and her heart, the core of the earth, sank further. She had traded one monster's oppression for another's nascent ambition, but the needs of survival outweighed the fears of prophecy. The rebellion required a weapon forged not of mortal metal, but of cosmic resentment. And so, The ultimate instrument of betrayal was manifested. Gaia delved into her own deepest essence, extracting the very bedrock of her eternal being, not simple iron, but adamantine, the hardest, most unbreakable, metaphysically dense substance in the cosmos, crystallized rage molded by a mother's desperate will. She shaped it into a massive, hooked, crescent-shaped sickle. This was no ordinary tool. It was a conceptual weapon designed specifically to cut the bonds of primordial lineage and separate the inseparable. It hummed with the chilling potential of parricide, its edge sharper than any known dimension. Cronus received the blade. It felt cold and light in his hand, despite its tremendous cosmic weight, as if it were perfectly balanced for the horrific task ahead. The plan was brutal in its simplicity, relying entirely on Uranus's boundless, self-destructive arrogance and passion. Every night, Uranus descended to cover Gaia entirely, indulging in the primal, crushing embrace that had become less an act of love and more an act of tyrannical possession. He never suspected that the foundation beneath him was preparing to shift the axis of the universe. Gaia, playing her part as the submissive consort, lured the Sky King in, drawing him into the deepest shadows where the sickle could strike undetected. The air was thick with false security and the metallic tang of impending doom. Cronus hid, breath held, the adamantine sickle resting against the cold stone, waiting for the pivotal, irreversible moment. The celestial event unfolded as always. Uranus descended, vast and breathtakingly arrogant, completely enveloping the earth in his star-dusted majesty. He was blind, deaf, and utterly complacent in his eternal dominion. He was king, and kings do not fall. But kings who rely on fear often ignore the silent killer waiting beneath their feet. As the primordial pair lay intertwined, Cronus exploded from the shadows. It was not a grand battle of titans, but a sudden, vicious, surgical execution. With a cry that was instantly swallowed by the sound of grinding cosmic power, Cronus raised the sickle and brought the adamantine edge down upon his unsuspecting father. The blow was aimed not at the heart, but at the source of Uranus's primal power,
severing his connection to creation itself. The sound was the loudest silence the universe had ever known, a moment where reality itself tore. Uranus shrieked, a vast, echoing howl of agony that instantly tore the sky away from the earth, separating them forever in a violent, permanent divorce. Ihua, the divine, golden blood of the gods, poured forth in torrents, splashing across the earth, contaminating the fertile ground with the stain of ultimate betrayal. Uranus, writhing in unimaginable pain and mutilation, retreated upward, ascending into the distant, newly defined expanse of heaven. As he ascended, his agony coalesced into the most potent curse ever uttered, instantly weaving a new law into the fabric of time. "You have betrayed your father, Cronus!" the wounded king of the sky roared, his voice shaking the stellar nurseries. "The power you gained by treachery will be lost by the very same treachery. A sun will rise just as you have risen and cast you down." The curse lingered, a terrifying prophecy hanging over the newly established order. Cronus stood victorious, breathing heavily, the weight of the universe now resting on his shoulders, the adamantine sickle dripping with golden ichor. He had won the crown, but he had inherited a curse of cyclical violence. The falling drops of Uranus's sacred blood were not merely waste. Where that divine essence met the receptive, resentful earth, new, terrible entities were instantly spawned, born of the original sin of parricide. From the ichor and the dark earth sprang the gigantes, the monstrous giants, destined to one day challenge the new cosmic order. And worse, far worse, came the araignées, the furies, terrible, snake-haired goddesses of vengeance, whose sole purpose was to hunt down and relentlessly punish those who committed the ultimate crime of kinslaying. The sickle, still dripping with the ethereal ichor of Uranus, was not hidden away in shame. It was displayed, a terrifying symbol of absolute power and the willingness to commit the ultimate sacrilege. Cronus, the liberator, immediately became the most terrifying warden the cosmos had ever known. He had promised freedom for his kin, but freedom under a tyrant is just a gilded cage. His first act, after seizing the celestial throne, was not one of charity or benevolence, but of calculated, chilling self-preservation. The monsters he had supposedly freed, the hundred-handed Hecatonchires and the one-eyed Cyclopes, they remained deep within the crushing abyss of Tartarus. They were not allies, they were weapons, too volatile to be trusted, and Cronus knew the power of a cosmic blacksmith better than anyone. He understood that the tools of rebellion were also the tools of overthrow. Why release the very beings capable of forging the next weapon that might pierce his own tyrannical heart? The age of absolute power had arrived, and it was guarded by silence and the eternal oppression of the deep. Cronus reigned from his lofty seat upon Mount Othrys, attempting to manufacture a golden myth around his bloody rise. This was the infamous Golden Age, a time of plenty, peace, and prosperity, but only if you dared not look too closely at the darkness pooling beneath the throne. The truth was that the Titan King was already rotting from the inside, consumed by the same disease that claimed his father, the horrifying, crippling paranoia of succession. He took his sister, the beautiful, sorrowful Titaness Rhea, as his queen. Their union was meant to solidify the new regime, to propagate a line that would rule forever across the boundless expanse of the universe. But even the most beautiful queen cannot mask a spiritual decay beneath the throne. Rhea was burdened not just by her brother's increasingly erratic and tyrannical behavior, but by the horrific, paralyzing knowledge of the primal prophecy. She was the sacred vessel for the very destruction that Cronus desperately sought to avoid. The other Titans, meanwhile, settled into their roles, carving up the burgeoning universe into spheres of influence. Oceanus and Tethys claimed the vast circulating body of the water, the all-encompassing river that girdled the nascent world, establishing their watery domain. Hyperion, the towering titan of brilliant light, and Thea, the goddess of sight, harnessed the very essence of the heavens, giving rise to the mighty celestial trinity of Helios, Selene, and Eos. Coeus and Phoebe mastered the intellect and the moon's dark side, while Crius was given the cold, steadfast order of the constellations. This was dynasty building on a monumental scale, a family plotting their eternal dominance, yet every marriage was strategic, every birth a potential threat to the paranoid king sitting on the summit of Mount Othrys. But the whispers never ceased. They echoed through the chasm of Tartarus and rustled in the leaves of the world tree. Gaia, the ancient earth, whose love was fierce and whose capacity for vengeance was limitless, ensured that the cosmic law held true. The warning was stark, precise,
and agonizingly specific. Just as Cronus had overthrown his father, so too would one of his own progeny rise up and cast him down into the eternal darkness. Rhea cradled the infant, feeling a brief, overwhelming surge of maternal relief. But before she could truly name her, before Hestia could take her first breath of celestial air, the shadow of Cronus fell upon them. He appeared not as the glorious king, but as the hungry, primeval force of time itself, Kronos, the devourer. The silence that followed was a scream trapped in Rhea's throat. This was kinslaying taken to a new, grotesque level, kin imprisonment within the cavernous belly of the father. Rhea was horrified, shattered, but Cronus was already pacing, justified by his fear. He had neutralized the threat. He had made the prophecy irrelevant, locking the entire future away inside his own massive stomach. The pattern repeated itself with terrifying regularity. Demeter came next, the grain giver, the nurturing goddess of the harvest. Gulp, swallowed. Then Hera, the fiercely proud, intensely powerful goddess who would become the future queen of the cosmos. Gulp, imprisoned. Then came Hades, the dark, brooding king of the underworld, destined to rule the silent dead. And finally, Poseidon, the earth shaker, the restless master of the sea. 5 children, 5 future rulers, all entombed within the living, cavernous darkness of their father's digestive system. Rhea, the once magnificent titaness, was reduced to a grieving, terrified shell, a constant producer of future hostages. She looked at her husband, this great king of time, and saw only a cannibalistic monster, driven mad by the fear he inherited. She understood the cruel irony. Cronus had sworn to break the tyrannical cycle, only to forge a chain of iron and fear far heavier than the one he shattered. She could not bear the thought of one more child vanishing into that monstrous maw, destined to live in the eternal darkness of their father's gut. Desperate, grief-stricken, and filled with the cold fury of a mother betrayed by a tyrant, Rhea finally turned to the one being who understood betrayal and prophecy better than anyone, her primal mother, Gaia, the earth. Gaia, the ancient source of all life, whose patience was eternal, but whose anger was volcanic, readily agreed to the conspiracy. She saw in Cronus's actions the ultimate failure, the failure to trust the future. The plan was audacious, dangerous, and reliant on a level of deception that rivaled the initial overthrow of Uranus. Rhea would carry the sixth and final child to term. But this time, the birth would be a secret, hidden from the watchful, paranoid eyes of the reigning Titan. When the time came, Rhea fled to the darkest, most hidden corner of the cosmos. Some say the lush, misty island of Crete, a cradle of ancient power. And there, in absolute secrecy, she gave birth to the child who would become the ultimate king of the gods. This child was Zeus, the true heir to the cosmos, and the final piece of Gaia's magnificent, cosmic plot for vengeance. The reign of Cronus, the king of time, was supposed to be the golden age, a perfect reversal of his father's tyranny. But absolute power is a poison, and the moment Cronus took the adamantine sickle in hand, he inherited more than just the cosmos. He inherited the crippling, soul-eating paranoia that had destroyed Uranus. He was a tyrant in waiting, crowned by betrayal. He knew the prophecy that doomed his father, that a child of his own seed would rise up and strike him down. The memory of the bloody deed committed against Uranus was not a lesson in compassion. It was a blueprint for self-preservation, a terrifying manual for how quickly a king could fall. He became obsessed, watching the horizon for the first flicker of resistance. His queen, Rhea, the mother of the gods, watched in agonizing horror as her magnificent husband began to mirror the monstrosity they had both fought to depose. Their children were born, divine beings of immense potential, yet each birth brought not joy, but the imminent threat of their father's crushing, paranoid power. He locked the universe's most vital forces inside his own churning darkness. Next came Demeter, the glorious lady of the harvest, and she too was devoured, ripped from her mother's arms and disappearing into the terrifying void of Cronus's stomach. The Titan King was attempting to halt time, to make his reign eternal by imprisoning the very generations meant to succeed him. Then came Hera, majestic and powerful, destined for the throne, but powerless against the brutal efficiency of her father's fear. She vanished. Following her, the cold, powerful presence of Hades, the future king of the dead, was swallowed. And finally, the tumultuous, sea-shaking might of Poseidon met the same gruesome fate. 5 Olympian deities trapped in the digestive system of their colossal parent.
Rhea was annihilated by grief, her divine heart shredded by the knowledge that she had traded one monster for another, one cycle of violence for an even colder, more calculated one. She refused to lose the sixth child, the one she knew carried the true potential to shatter the unending loop of patricide and succession crisis. She sought the dark advice of her mother, Gaia, the ancient Earth, who still remembered the sting of Uranus's chains and the necessity of absolute deceit. Gaia, the eternal plotter, provided the solution, an audacious, brilliant deception designed to play directly into Cronus's arrogant belief that he was omnipotent and safe. The plan required secrecy, speed, and the perfect decoy. The time for the birth of the final child arrived, the savior, named Zeus, the bright, thunderous essence of a new, terrifying age. She labored in the deepest shadows, the birth a desperate, silent act of cosmic treason. The moment Zeus was born, glowing with nascent, blinding power, Rhea took a massive, heavy stone, the weight of the earth itself, and meticulously swaddled it in the ceremonial golden cloth meant for the true heir. The deception was complete, but the delivery was the most dangerous part. The Omphalos stone, the great trick, descended into his belly, settling alongside the 5 true living gods. Cronus believed he had won, that the prophecy was a lie, and that his tyrannical age would never end. He sighed, confident, secure, and utterly, magnificently deceived. Meanwhile, the real Zeus, the future king of Olympus, was whisked away, spirited across the swirling seas, and hidden within the darkest, most labyrinthine caves of the island of Crete. This was where the revolution would be secretly forged, far from the watchful, paranoid gaze of the king of time. Rhea had entrusted her child to the guardianship of the ferocious Curetes. These were warrior spirits, loyal and loud, whose mission was to guarantee absolute silence in the cavern. Whenever the infant Zeus cried, a sound that could shake the heavens with its nascent power, the Curetes would clash their bronze shields against their spears in a deafening, rhythmic war dance. This incessant, metallic clamor drowned out the sounds of the future king, creating a protective curtain of noise that reached the ears of Cronus as nothing more than distant, harmless tribal celebration. The true heir was growing strong, nourished by sacred goat milk, hidden by the relentless echo of war drums, preparing for the day he would challenge the very titan who had attempted to erase his existence.
Zeus was not just safe. He was being forged in the hidden crucible of the earth, a secret weapon growing into the necessary thunderbolt, ready to emerge from the darkness and violently eject his 5 siblings from the terrifying prison of his father's stomach. The war was coming, but this time the conspirators had a true champion, a true weapon, and a deep, burning knowledge of their enemy's fatal flaw, his consuming, absolute fear.